Well, the Middle East and the United States, what are the implications of war and what could be the result? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, let's first start out with the questions that you might have. A very easy way to get those questions answered, whatever they might be, is through the portal at prudentmoney.com. You just go up to the top of the page. There is a Ask Prudent Money link. Send it in. We'll get you taken care of. We'd love to get the questions. Also, while you're at the website, sign up for the newsletter list. Make sure you're in the know on what when we put information out, and keep you posted. So that's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, this weekend, a major conflict broke out in the Middle East. I'm sure you've heard about it. It's dominated the news cycle and most people's conversations, starting with Israel and the United States and bombing Iran and starting this. Is it a conflict or is it potentially a major war? Something that I want to make sure that we do not lose sight of when talking about any of this is, yes, the effects are very important, that they have negative effects to our retirement money, to investments, retirement, and investment plans, all that. That's important, but not even remotely close. Of course, I know you would agree, to the loss of human life. And so we always want to keep that in our prayers in the very forefront of everything. And I also think from a stewardship standpoint, as we've been talking a lot about this year so far, even though it's not been a very long year, only a couple of months, but we've been talking about it quite a bit, is how risk factors in to the subject of stewardship. What we're going to talk about in regards to what is happening in the Middle East is purely speculative. We've watched as President Trump has dealt with many major countries and made some dramatic moves, made some dramatic, even more dramatic sound bites, really for them to not amount to much of anything, and which has been good. He's made some pretty big threats as president, and that's what we've come to learn is that's his negotiating style. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that not only is that his style of negotiation. Of course, I don't really know how much negotiation is going to be going on in this particular situation, or how long it's going to take. That's, in fact, a timeline has been all over the map. And besides, what country gives out the information on a timeline anyway? That's always kind of been interesting to me, is to ask President Trump what his timeline is. Like, he's not going to divulge that. It is what it is as far as this goes. He speculates as 4 to 5 weeks. But once again, this is all purely speculative. And as I was saying, you've got to keep in mind, he's got a very dramatic way of negotiating. That's what he does. And second, I think that you have to remember what kind of a leadership style, whether you like it or not, he brings to the table. President Trump always has a plan, and he markets that plan, and he chooses to let you know what you need to know. I think you would agree. I mean, you never really know what's happening or where the end result's supposed to go or where the end result is he's wanting to take it. So you got to keep that in mind. And what's interesting, if you read any of his books that he's written, and you'll see this throughout the chapters, and we'll never have a true idea of what's going on. So if you look at his background and you look at the deals he's put together, all the real estate, and how he developed his however many billions of dollars in fortune that he has, you have to realize that he's a swing for the fence guy. He's looking for the home run. He's looking for the bold, and he's looking for the spectacular way of. Everything he does, he markets and puts his name on it. Yeah, I guess we have all noticed that. And his ideas, once again, they're bold. This conflict that looks more like a war than it does a conflict, but this conflict that has been started in the Middle East is a big deal, and it has the potential to be a powder keg about to go off. Lots of implications to this. A lot of oil and a lot of oil money that also is in this situation. And who knows what the end result really is, because we're not in those closed door meetings. But it's a big deal. So one of the things that I want to make sure that we keep in mind are some of the things that we want to watch and make sure we keep an eye on. So here are some areas of concern. I think the very first thing, the biggest issue that we're looking at is that, you might as well call it for what it looks like. He declared an act of war on a country without a solid reason. Now, this is just observation, but that looks like probably the biggest one. And of course, they're running with that through the press, and they're running through that political parties and all that. But put all that aside, it's a pretty big deal to do what they've done and not have declared an act of war. So, call it what you want it. Further, he did it by himself without Congress's approval. I don't know. That seems like a big deal to me. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal because nobody's doing anything about it. But he did. He didn't include the Congress in any part of that, and I think that's kind of a big deal. And I don't know if it would turn out any different. In fact, their process of going through that is probably so archaic that they don't have to give 5 to 10 weeks up of around the clock negotiation with each other of what makes the most sense and go through the political processes and all that. So probably a good reason why he bypasses Congress. Why they let him get away with that, who knows if it'll happen this time. Who knows? Once again, purely speculative at this point. Boots on the ground. He did mention this. I think that that would be an absolute disaster for a number of reasons that we don't really need to go into. But that's the reason why past presidents have done it all from the air and destroyed targets and done all that without putting boots on the ground. And there's a reason for that, because that can go really bad really quick. If this does go bad, inflation cannot be hid anymore. The cost of oil has the potential to go through the roof, well over $100 a gallon, and we would definitely feel that at the pump. The biggest, one of the biggest issues. Well, let me back that up and say it this way: the fact that we have had hardly any inflation with gas and that kind of thing has been remarkable. If this spirals out of control, we could see a dramatic increase in the cost of gas. Of course, cost of oil would lead to that increase because of the Strait of Hormuz. Hope I'm saying that right and not butchering it too bad, but the Strait of Hormuz, which has become the world's most closely watched waterway during the beginnings of this particular conflict. This is a long stretch of land that is bordered by multiple oil-producing nations and probably one of the most vulnerable in the energy trade. You have to get through that area to deliver oil, pick up oil, that type of thing. And basically what they do is Iran shuts it down. And they could keep it, if it remains closed, oil and gas prices are almost certain to surge globally. And so this is a strategic place, or part of the world economy that's got to be protected. In fact, it was announced today President Trump is going to escort through the use of the U.S. Navy to get these tankers through that vulnerable waterway that is just so very important to the oil markets and everything that goes along with that. So 21 miles across, and the Straits shipping lanes are so small that tankers are especially vulnerable to attack. So what's interesting, if you think about still a lot. I don't know. I think as I kind of process some of this, there's a lot of things to consider. So that's what we're looking at. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil flows through this particular Strait of Hormuz, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So, how high could prices go? It just really depends on how long they keep that area shut down. So, I mean, that's from the pure economic side. That is what is at risk right now. And, to pile that onto inflation, where we are right now, could see inflation really ramp up, because we haven't had any kind of really big energy costs that have contributed to inflation going up or anything up until this point. So inflation won't be, you can't hide it, you can't pretend it's not there. It has the potential to really show up and stay high and of course it hits the summer months as well. So oil quickly could be over $100 a barrel. So all of this is going on. All of this is happening. And of course, it's one of those things where it's obviously a 24-hour news cycle. You can follow and keep right up to date on what's going on. The markets, of course, are watching it. Not a good day today on the market. And you got all that going on. And let's take a look at some other things that are happening and taking place. First of all, let's take a look at just various sectors of the markets and talk a little bit about what's going on. I've been talking about and bringing up the private credit funds. This is where, if I was going to borrow money from a private credit fund, that means I probably couldn't get money out of traditional ways, which would be to go to a bank or anything like that. So you can imagine, if you're borrowing money from a private credit fund, you're paying quite a bit more in interest. And this is a whole big investment business in itself. And typically when you see things start to come apart and problems starting to appear, is when you see kind of cracks develop in the surface of these private credit funds. And we've seen a lot of this. This has really been happening quite a bit. And what's interesting to me is that these, and I guess it's to strengthen investor confidence and keep people settled down, is that if you need your money, they're going to give it right back to you. So they make it look like it's, a lot of these funds, like it's, the liquidity is not a problem, we'll give you your money back. Well, the truth is, they're having trouble doing that. They're having trouble stepping up to the plate and saying, here you go, here's your money back. And that's where you get a huge loss of confidence. And that can quickly spiral out of control. So we want to keep our eyes on that particular situation. And I'll keep my eyes on it for you, and we'll talk about it as things happen. There was probably the biggest player in this private credit fund, which is Blackstone, was talking about some issues they're having, and that's not what you want to hear. So something like this can really stir up the private debt markets, and that would not necessarily be a good thing. The other thing that we want to keep an eye on is this whole idea, and this is why the price has gone up. This is why so many people are rushing to buy it, and they're looking at it for reasons of a safe haven, for reasons that maybe for a currency replacement, which I can never see happening. But gold being back to what we just talked about, being a safe haven. Today's a great example of this, where you saw gold lose quite a bit of money today, quite a bit of percentage loss. And, if it's a safe haven, it should be going up. And so I would challenge you, if you are investing in gold strictly because of the idea that it's a safe haven, simply for the idea of it's used to back certain assets, and that's where the value comes, I would rethink that. You always have to make sure that you know why you're investing in a particular investment, and why that makes sense. And not that I don't think gold makes sense. Gold definitely makes sense. It can be a correlated, or what's called a non-correlated asset, which I'll get back to here in a second. But it can be a great part of a portfolio as long as it's done within reason. A smaller allocation. These companies that say, put out your entire IRA in gold, I just totally disagree with that. But from the standpoint of that it's a safe haven, would mean that that's where you want to be invested in times like this. Well, I don't think that the safe haven is going to lose way 2 to 3 times more than the market is going to lose. So you want to be careful about that, and really look into it, because if you go back to the financial crisis, many other situations in time where gold should act like a safe haven, it did not act like a safe haven, and you want to keep that in mind. It really comes down to you're using gold as a non-correlated investment. Now, what that means, and it's important that you understand this, and I think that you'll be so much further ahead of your fellow investors, or for your friends or whomever, if you understand how this concept works. Correlated means it goes up and down the same as, say, the stock market, a particular investment. Stocks are, for the most part, correlated investments. They tend to move the same direction. If you have a non-correlated investment, that means it moves opposite, or that's the intention for it to be moving opposite. And in non-correlated investments, you can hedge or protect your portfolio. And not that this works all the time, 100% of the time. It's in theory, of course, but the majority of the time. And I don't see gold working in that manner at the majority of the time, being a non-correlated investment. We'll get back to that at some other time, and when we don't have something as important as what's going on in the Middle East to talk about. But it is something that's very important to know and understand. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. We're talking about the Middle East, what's going on there, the dramatic scenes that we all watched over the 24 news cycle over the weekend, and what its implications are for our investments and for our country and the global economy, and not to lose sight of the potential for casualties. I mean, it obviously overshadows all that. And we really want to keep those, our soldiers and everybody involved, in our prayers. I guess we'll keep coming back to this whole question: is it a war or is it a conflict? I think we'll see soon enough. But tough situation. The other thing that this has a dramatic effect on, and we talked a little bit about this last week, that the yield, on the 10-year Treasury note has a great influence on where the mortgage rates will end up. Well, towards the end of last week, I believe it was rates are below 6% into the 5 percentile range, and that was good news to see that. One of the things I talked about, by the looks of the charts, investment charts of the 10-year yield, is that it looked to me that it could start going back up at this point, and that's exactly what ended up happening, just about what the charts were saying. So we'll have to keep an eye on that because once again, real estate, it's so very critical to get real estate going and back up again, and it's got a tough road ahead. And it just getting some good news, getting some to see the yields fall a little bit was absolutely a good thing, and that was a little bit short lived. But that's what's going to happen. You're going to see investments and interest rates and all kinds of things going all over the board. As far as the stock market goes, I don't believe that the stock market thinks that this is a big of a problem yet. We saw, of course, the markets open up really down, but at the grand scheme of things, when you consider what we're talking about, the potential of war and price of oil over $100 a barrel and all these types of things, you would think that the markets would be way down, and they should have been, but they weren't. So I think that's a sign that says simply, markets got a degree of confidence in President Trump and what he's doing, and sees this as a simple buying opportunity. And this is what ends up happening in bear markets. And I'm not saying that this is one. Way too early to be speculating that. But this is what is very important to understand, is that you get into situations where the market will go up, and it will look like that. Well, this thing is over with. The market found a bottom and it's starting to recover, and it's going to go up into a new trend, and everybody's going to make money. And then all of a sudden, it starts to drop again. That's what happens in these types of markets, and you got to be real mindful of that. But what happens is people quote unquote buy on the dip, meaning it drops to a point where they feel like that is it, that's the bottom, and then they jump in and they start buying up the stock market again. And then for those who do it, they get burned because the market goes back down. It will, it's tough to say how many significant times that it makes sense to buy on the dip, and then it won't make sense to buy on the dip. And that's what you want to be really careful that you don't get caught up in. So these markets and this particular types of situations and environments are tricky without question. But as you're watching all this play out, the one thing to key in on is that investor confidence and the various indicators that monitor that. And the question comes down to, are they losing confidence in what the market is? What's happening in the Middle East? Are they losing confidence that things are going to turn around? Are they losing confidence that inflation is under control? That the Federal Reserve Board will be low? And that's the other thing I didn't even bring up. Is Federal Reserve Board, once they meet, there's absolutely no way in the middle of all this that they could lower rates, when in fact they may have to raise rates. Can you imagine all of a sudden the Federal Reserve Board raising rates and what that would do to mortgage rates and everything? Can't even imagine. Let's just not get way too ahead of ourselves, and we'll back it up a little bit and talk about what's happening in the present. And when there's news to report, I will talk about it on the program and make sure that you are staying up with the other side of the story. And we'll keep our eye on this situation. Well, if you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.